Let's talk about tomorrow night a little bit in the action. Rappaport just kind of deflated all of our balloons whenever Schrage said that he thinks there's going to be 10 trades in the first round. The record for trades in the first round is 9. That happened in 2022. So saying 10 is a number which would mean most ever. He might think there's 12, but he doesn't have to say 12. If he says 10, he gets it right here. This is Price is Right ruling. Rappaport said, I don't think that's the case at all. He's thinking under that. Do you think this is going to be explosive from what you're hearing and how you look at the board, or how do you think this kind of goes throughout the evening tomorrow night?
Well, I think the problem with the board is there's very few defensive players. I don't think a lot of teams have a lot of defensive players graded in the first round. And so what happens is when that occurs, it's a law of supply and demand. That's what drives trade. If we don't get this guy, we're not going to get another guy. And so I think there lies the conversation. And I think the top of the draft being so unsettled, we know Minnesota's trying to trade up. The Giants have really have not denied they're trying to trade up. The Raiders, could they possibly trade up? Sure. And then you get into another layer where if we don't get this player, what are we going to do? If we don't get this corner, is there another corner we like? And because there's so few defensive players on a lot of first round grades, I think it becomes a little bit, it's hard to predict. Again, if you're asking for too much, I think at the top of the draft, Pat, the trade value chart is insignificant because there's supply and demand, right? There's more teams wanting it, so you can recoup more. When you get towards the middle of the draft, where teams are willing to trade, then you'll start to see the trade value come into place. But what we do know, and Bill will talk a lot about this, is there is a line where there's only so many first rounders. Everybody thinks there's 32 first rounders. There's not. Once you no longer have any first rounders on your board that you feel are worthy, to go from 24 to 40, you're getting the same value of player. You may not get the same position, but you're going to get the same value of player, and you get more picks. And teams are enticed to do that.
And then the teams that are enticed to move up there later, the teams that want to take advantage of the fifth-year option on the expensive positions potentially,
exactly.
Which we literally just learned a week ago when Bill Belichick was on talking about, well, then you got the fifth-year option that potentially comes into play at expensive positions so that they have that entire thing. It's like, I've never heard that. Should obviously think about that towards the end. It's like what the Packers did with Jordan Love. Speaking of big price positions, Connor has a question for you.
Yeah, Lombo, obviously the Patriots have been sitting at 3, and the trade-up rumors and the trade-down rumors have been happening, for the past couple months, and it's all kind of culminating to tomorrow night. Obviously, Drake Maye seems to be the pick there. Is that what you're thinking? And then I also saw a report on the internet, take that how you will, who knows if it's real or not, especially right now, that the Patriots in the offseason, their pitch to some guys in free agency, at least on the offensive side, was, hey, we're going to sign a quarterback for $8 million on a one-year deal, and then we're going to draft a rookie quarterback with that number 3 overall pick. Is that something teams would actually do in free agency? And would that be a tell, like, hey, even though there's a lot of hoopla around them trading back in Minnesota coming up, they're probably going to stand pat at 3 and take Drake Maye?
Yeah, I think, look, they just look at their depth chart. The depth chart tells you everything what's going on, right? They signed Brissett for a 1-year contract, whereas the Raiders signed Gardner Minshew for a multiple-year contract. So their depth chart, they're looking for a quarterback. They basically told Brissett, you're the bridge to our next quarterback, and he accepted the $8 million deal. So I would find it hard to believe that the Patriots would risk moving down and then not getting a quarterback. They will come out of the first round with a quarterback. There's no doubt, 1,000% in my mind that will occur. Whether it's Drake Maye or J.J. McCarthy, I'm not certain of that because I don't know how everybody's boards are going to be different. But I do believe they're going to come out of it, and they're going to be very careful to not trade away from the ability to get the quarterback. See, that's the key thing. Everybody wants you to trade down and pick up more picks, but then if you lose the guy you thought you were going to get, you're in real trouble. And the Patriots are going to come out of this with a quarterback, just like Denver, Pat, is going to come out of this with a quarterback. I know they traded for Zach Wilson. I know that. I get that. And the Jets are paying half of it. But going into this draft, all they have were Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci. You're basically saying we're going to have a quarterback, right?
You know how he's the
Nooch man. And so, like, the depth chart tells you everything that you need to know. So when you focus away from the noise on the outside and all the rhetoric, the Giants don't need a quarterback. They got Tommy DeVito. They've got, they've got Drew Lock. They've got, like all the rhetoric. If you just look at the depth chart, they'll tell you the answer.
I love that. We're putting together the draft board for Bill. And on the right side, left side of the draft board is all the team's needs. And it's like, that's a pretty valuable piece of information.
Huge.
For that's a big part of the draft process that I didn't even really, think about taking place. Almost as important as who's available. It's like, who do we think in front of us is going to need to take? And if it's a similar person, all of a sudden we might have to move. If not, they'll make a decision for us. If we got two guys tied, it's like this team is going to make a decision for us. Let's stay with the quarterbacks. You just talked about Denver. Everybody's putting Bo Nix there. So that means Ty has a question for you.
Yeah, Lombo, you just mentioned it. And earlier, in the process, a lot of people were saying, hey, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, both these guys probably early day two guys. But now at this point, it seems like a certainty that all of these guys are going to go and maybe be gone by pick 14 or 15. Is that what you're thinking as well? Is that we're going to have the run on quarterbacks early that everyone thought, but then Penix and Nix will both be gone, in the early teens?
I don't know where they're going to go. I do believe there'll be 6 in the first round. And I think a lot of this has to do with the connectivity to the coach and what they see, right? I think that's really important. Let's just say that Sean Payton has really done a good job in his career of evaluating quarterbacks. When he was with Bill Parcells in Dallas, he wanted Tony Romo. They signed him as a college free agent. Now, if they would have picked Tony Romo in the first round, Mad Mel would have come out, right?
Yeah.
You would have been doing that Mel. Oh my God, but he was worthy of a first round pick the way he played his career. See, we get so caught up in where we pick them as opposed to how they play. And that's usually part of the coverage on Thursday. It really matters how they play. And some of these teams see some things in the quarterbacks that they can make them better players. Remember, Sean Payton wanted to draft Pat Mahomes. He lost out. Think about how the league would have been dramatically different had the Saints made that trade and not the Chiefs. And I don't think if Sean likes a quarterback, and I don't know if he likes Bo Nix or not, I have no idea. But if he likes one, you got to believe he likes him for a reason. He's going to develop him. And I think that's what people see in some of these guys, that why they're prompted to do it. And the guy at home doesn't believe that these guys are first rounders, but the coach coaching them can get the most out of them. Remember, it's how they play, not where we pick them.
No, because we judge the draft success the day after the draft.
Right away.
That is,
of course you do.
Yeah, of course.
I'll give you a perfect example. I'll get the 49ers 2022 draft, okay? They got an A- in that draft, okay? They got an A- in the draft. Now, that A- is actually the correct grade for all the wrong reasons. They blew every pick from 1 to 6 was not the right pick. But they got Brock Purdy at the 7th round, so that gives them an A.
Yeah.
And so, but we don't know that until later. And these draft grades are the most ridiculous things you ever. Nobody goes back and rechecks the draft grades. It's the only thing. When I was in Catholic school, the nuns would check your grades. Like you had to.
Well, that'd be accountability.
In the draft.
We don't want that.
Yeah, no. We don't want that.
Well, we don't, for sure.
No.
Yeah, we would certainly like that to continue as we do some predicting of stuff. But, I assume the reason why they got the A- the day after that draft wasn't because of Brock Purdy, though.
Definitely not.
Brock Purdy was not even mentioned.
It had nothing to do with Purdy.
In the A-. But now here we are. And now here we are 3 years later. It's like the only reason you snuck out of that draft is because of the one you didn't even talk about. It's a fascinating business that we are certainly a part of. That's why for tomorrow night, we can't wait just to stir it up. I can't wait for Bill because he's going to do a breakdown pretty much every player drafted. Film.
Oh, yeah, it would be great.
He teamed up with NFL.
And he's watched every player. What people don't realize is, he's written notes of. The best thing is you're going to have, when that Mac used to come out and we were in meetings in New England and that Mac was in the meeting, the MacBook, that Pro that he uses, that he writes all the notes in, you're in for a long-ass meeting.
Every call is I love every single moment. It's like talking ball is awesome. I'm getting a chance to talk ball with Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
Awesome. But every call I think is he said, hey, quick question or whatever. And then I think we got like a 5-10 minute thing. I'm on there 45 minutes an hour every time. Because he'll say something, and I'll be like, oh, on that note, I'll think of something that has happened. I'll ask a question. And then I open Pandora's box there. Because now it is like I hear a story from this era. I hear a story from this decision being made. And then I obviously have follow-ups to that. And then all of a sudden we're at a point where he ties it back to like who could potentially go number 27 this year. I don't think he should, but that's probably what will end up happening. And he has notes on He's still in it right now. He is still very much in it completely.
And here's where you get an added value when you have him on is he can. So, like, let's take Alabama, for example. Alabama with the great Nick Saban, he loves to play man-to-man defense. He loves it, right? He wants his corners to cover. This year, they didn't play as much man-to-man. Now, there's 2 corners that are going in the first round by a lot of mock drafts that Alabama had played for. So where Bill's going to be able to kind of tell you what's going on is how does the scheme relate to what we're evaluating and the strength of the player. So if you take Arnold or you take Kool-Aid in the first round, are you really getting a true shutdown man-to-man corner? Because Nick Saban, one of the greatest defensive back coaches and one of the greatest head coaches in college football, he wants to play a lot of man. But yet when he was playing with these guys, they played less man. Okay, so what happens to often, and where Bill will give you guys insight, is the tape, the scheme will tell you what they think of the player.
Wait until you see this tape. Wait until you see this tape, Lombo, that he's put together with NFL Films. I don't know how many hours NFL Films has been grinding away on these, but it is. We got spotlights. We got this. Who they're playing against too is another NFL type person. So we got a good play.
It's important because level of competition is the most important thing in evaluating college. Like when you're going to hear tomorrow on Thursday, I watched 77 tapes on this player. Well, you wasted your time because it only matters. It's the right tape. Okay. I'm not watching a player play against Drake. I'm watching the player play against NFL players. That's why the Senior Bowl. Al Davis watched the Senior Bowl until it was brutal. We watched it's all we did. Because it was the level of comp that was so important. And that's really what matters. All these guys that come out there and say, I watched 77 tapes on this guy. Well, you just wasted your time because watching him against, some small school, and I hate to criticize the school, it's not relevant.
Yeah, we'll go irrelevant university.
Yeah.
Great education.
IU.
Great name. Don't you say that about
Indiana. If you
Don't
will.
you say that about Indiana.
If you will.
Don't you Kurt Signetti's there. He's turning it around.
Yeah. I mean, the women's basketball team, for sure. Everything else, I don't know about it.
All right, we'll see. They got NIL money coming. But to your point of what you're saying, whenever somebody tells us that they watch every single play this person have, we say, well, you seem like a person who manages your time inefficiently is what we should immediately say. But what Bill is, this film that they put together, we're literally just seeing it. I saw like an example of what it could be like 2 weeks ago. And then like maybe another half of one. We could also do it this way. It's like, let's go with this way. It seems to be easier. They're like, we're thinking the same thing. And then we haven't really seen them until yesterday. We got 25 of these files yesterday.
Oh, yeah. It's awesome.
It is so awesome. In like the way he's going to basically lay it out. Like, hey, here's good. Here's also potential, in showing plays. And then why the team, it's going to be, we're going to make society smarter.
So pumped.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody ever says that about us.
No.
Nobody ever says that.
That's not true. That's not true.
Well, we'll see. Darius has a question to you about the politics of the game.
Yeah, quarterback, especially. You mentioned how people get caught up on where they're drafted, not necessarily how they're playing. I know fan bases do. And owners, how do the conversations go from the ownership groups when you draft a guy first, second, third overall? Maybe you have a bridge guy in there playing decent, maybe will. Like, how do those conversations come down from the top? Like, hey, we just invested however many dollars in this guy. Let's get him in there and play him as soon as possible.
Yeah, well, there's always that pressure, Darius, from the owner. He wants to play the rookie, and certainly they do. And I think ultimately it's really not as much about money. It's about we got to make sure we showed the public that we were right with the pick. I think that's the key thing, right? I think that's what Tennessee's doing right now. Tennessee wants to show everybody they were right with trading up to get Will Levis. And we don't know the answer to that yet. We don't know that. They believe they're right, and that's why everybody thinks they're going to take an offensive lineman in the first round. I think they'll take a wide receiver because they're doing everything to make Will Levis a better player. And I think that comes from the ownership. Let's do everything in our power to do that. I think the Eagles did that this offseason when they signed Saquon Barkley. They said to themselves, look, we have to help Hurts become a better player. And when we do, he can be elite. But when we don't, he's not the same guy. I think that's why the Barkley signing came in play. So a lot of that pressure from the ownership is part of this thing about drafting a quarterback is what does the team look like after we pick them? See, no one says this in drafting, and I think this is a critical component. You have to ask yourself the question, what has to be right for this pick to be correct? So what that means is, what do we have to have perfectly aligned to make this a correct pick? Brock Purdy goes to San Francisco. It was perfectly aligned, and then he became a good pick. Some guys go to schools, some guys go to teams that just aren't perfectly aligned, and they get all messed up and their careers fall short.
And then they go into the cycle.
I think that's got to be the second thing. And then they go into the cycle. That's really the question the owner should be asking. It's not who are we picking, is what are we going to do with the player to develop the player within the system? That's the critical component of all draft picks.
Well, don't all scouts, they see the greatness, and then the coaches, if they don't pull it out of them, it's the coach's fault. Scouts, we found that. Yeah.
That's the internal problem that goes on, coaches and scouting. It's like, okay, the guy's got great potential, but he doesn't play to it. Well, there's a reason he doesn't play to it.
Well,
and you've got to figure it out.
These
then it
coaches
becomes
suck.
the coach's fault. Yeah. But it's not all the coach's fault, right? It's not always that. And I'm a personnel guy. And I think sometimes you practice coaching. I mean, that's what happened to us at the Raiders all the time. We would keep coaching guys. We call them guys on scholarship because he wanted to keep them there because they ran fast, when in reality they couldn't play.
Okay, let's talk about people who couldn't play or who could play. Hembo sent me an interesting stat today, and it's actually a graph. It's last 20 years, first-round draft picks, whether it was a success or a failure at each position. They would consider a success a second contract with the team. A miss would be doesn't end up with it. Boom, there it is right there. So at the very top of that, center, O-tackle, guard. Okay, offensive line has the highest percentage of hit rate. Now, guard is at 50% because sometimes a guard is a center that you thought you could move to a guard, and let alone that whole conversation. But whenever you look at all the other positions, it truly is a roll of the dice on whether or not it's going to work out. Now, some of these guys might have went to another team and end up having great success, and what are the outliers in that whole thing? But what the success rate and the hit rate on the first round of the draft is versus what public perception is every single year when the draft comes, vastly different. There's a lot more busts than there are Canton Hall of Fame busts happening in each first round. And to that point, Pac-Man's got a question for you.
Speaking of that, looking at that graphic right there, this is a deep offensive line draft right here. Do you think it's over or under 6 linemen get drafted?
I think it's over, Pac-Man. I think it is. And I think that graph is really important, right? All we talk about
feels like it's the safest, doesn't it? Feels like it's the safest.
And you get a solid starter at cheaper money than it costs in the open market. It's like today, Armon St. Brown signed a huge contract, okay? Maybe the highest paid receiver in football. All right, he was drafted in the 4th round. Tyreek Hill was drafted in the 5th round. Cooper Kupp was drafted in the 3rd round. Now, Justin Jefferson was the 5th receiver picked in the receiver draft. Okay? And yet all we talk about is drafting. You got to draft these receivers. You got to draft these receivers when it's the hardest position for scouts and personnel people to evaluate. Why is that? Well, it's because there's no press coverage in college. You don't see the guys separate. And you know, Pac-Man, from playing corner and Darius, that those guys that can't get away from press don't play. And if they can't separate the top of route, they can't play. But yet all we talk about is drafting these receivers. See, the hardest position to evaluate in football is ones where you can't see the player play the pro game. And that's why the dual player, the tight end, you don't see him block, but you take him as a receiver. Well, if he's only a great receiver if he can beat a linebacker if they have a linebacker on the field. He's only a great receiver if he can beat a nickel corner. Then all of a sudden there's no value in that. You gain no advantage. And so the dual position, run, catch, block, run, those are the hard ones to evaluate. And that's why that graph is there. And that's why Walsh said long ago that wide receiver is the last position you fix on your team until the rest of the team is done. But in today's world, everybody wants more skill. Everybody, we got to get more. Meanwhile, nobody's paying attention to the league. that the highest paid receivers are getting drafted in the second and the third day.
Yeah, and there's another big contract coming in that wide receiver department. Go ahead, Ty.
Yeah, Lombo, in terms of Brandon Aiyuk, we heard John Lynch basically say, hey, out of respect to him, I'm not going to talk about this, but we've been working on a contract. We want him to be a Niner for life. But the more we're hearing, Daniel Jeremiah said this morning, all the calls he's getting, he's hearing, hey, Colts, Jags, maybe two teams to look at for trading for Aiyuk. With that in mind, we also know the Colts are potentially, high on Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe trying to trade up to get him. But if that doesn't happen, can you see a situation where we see Brandon Aiyuk get moved tomorrow to maybe a team like the Colts or the Jags after losing Calvin Ridley?
Well, I think this. Here's what nobody wants to talk about is when you trade Aiyuk, you're trading him for a player. Okay? Let's go back in time. The 49ers made a decision that they had two really great defensive tackles, Armstead and DeForest Buckner. They weren't going to sign Buckner to an extension, so they traded him to the Colts. Great trade for the Colts.
Right, thank you.
And they picked Kinlaw. To replace him. So they got 5 years and a cheaper player, and they hoped they got the same player. They didn't. It failed. So now if you trade Aiyuk to say you trade him to the Colts, okay? What receiver are you going to get that's better than Aiyuk at the 12th pick or 15th pick of the draft? You got to put a name there. You've got to put a name in that group, right? You have to put a name that you could say this guy's better than or equal to, but we're getting a cheaper contract. I don't think you could say that in this draft. Once the three receivers go, then you've got a lot of other question marks, and you're better off trading down and getting more of them like Green Bay has done. Like, for example, Christian Watson's picked in the second round. Drake London got picked in the same draft in the first round. The Packers wouldn't trade Watson for London. He's a better player. So you have to take a look at that. And that's where the 49ers have to make that decision. Like, if we trade Brandon Aiyuk, we have to get a player equal to or better than. And how is that in this draft? Because all draft picks have names attached to them. They're just not out there as ones. They become a name and they become a player. Who's that player going to be as good as him? I think that's where Lynch is in a problem because he knows he can't replace him in this draft with a player.
Well, I think the good news is, though, he might be an Indianapolis Colt. Bad news is Amon-Ra St. Brown just signed for nearly $30 million a year. So that's immediately what you're going to have to go if you want to.
Well, you're going to have to pay him, right? Look, they got Debo that pay a ton of money to. If you want to pay him, maybe they decide to trade Debo. I don't know. They're going to have to do something. Now, here's the advantage they have.
Oh, I didn't even think about
they have
that.
A quarterback on a rookie contract.
Well, I didn't even think about Debo getting traded there because Debo, the Colts, is great too.
Yeah,
I absolutely, I love everything, and I'm sure Debo's like, wait a minute, I literally just signed my deal. I'm leading the way out in the bump box here.
It's too much money in the wide receiver room. If I'm the Colts, I would not for either one of those guys.
I agree, Darius.
Whoa.
I agree.
Opinion.
Like. Yeah. Everybody talks about it. The number 30s ranks 32nd team in the National Football League in terms of money in the wide receiver room are the Green Bay Packers, and they have a really good receiver room.
Yes, they
it's
do.
It's been proven over time that when you can draft young receivers in the second, third, and fourth round and develop them. Look at A.J. Brown, second round, Debo, second round. I mean, you can do it.
Pittman.
Like to put everybody wants you. Like all these mock drafters, all they do is put more. This is the first day Belichick walked into the Cleveland Browns in 1991. You can ask him this story. And he looked at our draft board and he saw 77 receivers up there on the draft board. He almost had a heart. You're telling me that all these guys are going to play wide receiver? I mean, it was that day forward the board got wiped down.
Day forward, it never looked the same. Never looked the same. It's a crazy game, though, because it's like the top ones are game changers.
Yeah.
Like Tyreek Hill. If you can get Tyreek Hill on your team, you're going to pay
fifth-round pick.
Yeah, fifth-round pick, but I'm saying they're paying him right now. He's getting $30
have to pay him. Look, I'm all for paying him. What I'm not all for is taking the risk of drafting them when they're not number one receivers. I would draft them second, third, and fourth. I'm all for that. I'm just not, especially when you put that chart up when there's a 27% chance of hitting. Like, you're taking the position that has the most risk to it. Plus, the other thing, are you sure we're getting a number one receiver? If I'm picking in the top 10, I want a number one. I want the defense to say, you got to roll the coverage to him. You roll the coverage to Tyreek. You roll the coverage to Jefferson. That's what I want. I don't want a guy that's just good. Michael Pittman was at the top of the second. He's a good player.
Great. He's our best player.
Yeah.
I mean, no offense to anybody else on our team. Michael Pittman shows up every day.
For sure.
And he is our guy. And he doesn't say a word, a peep.
Nope.
He is just, he's working. We're doing our thing. He's like the best Colt he's the best Colt we have.
Yeah, truly.
He's the best. I mean, DeForest Buckner, we can add in there for sure. Kenny Moore, I mean, since, the whole contract thing happened, he's been phenomenal. But Michael Pittman Jr. is like our dude. He's in the second round. So what you're saying is, why are we wasting a top 10 pick if he's not our number 1 guy? If he's going to be a number 2 guy, we might be able to find a number 2 guy.
That's right.
And
That's
3
right.
or 4
Yeah.
potentially in here. If we're an outright 1, if it's game wrecker, game focus, we spend top 10, top 20 pick on that. But you can get an offensive lineman up there that they won't be in second or third round because of size, things like that.
And they're great. They're explosive players. They definitely can change the game, but they are also a position you can take out of a game. You can roll the cover. Think about Bill. Like, hey, let me put my second best corner on him and put a safety over the top and then force you to beat me with that wide receiver 2 or 3 guy. And if you look even historically, like the game's the best receivers of all time, a lot of them don't have chips. Great players, but a lot of you look at the top probably 8 all time, over half of them probably don't have a chip. And that position, like you want your quarterback, you want the running back. Like we need Richardson to be our best coach. We need Jonathan Taylor to be our best coach. Like I love Pittman, but when the rubber really meets the road, those guys can be taken out.
If you were to speak to the people from the Caucasus Mountains, chip would be a championship?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to make sure.
We didn't know it was chip on shoulder.
Yeah,
Or
right.
potato
Chip.
chip.
Or potato chip or, chip blocks.
Chip block,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. Talking about championship.
Chip a person.
Yeah. And everybody's trying to get a championship. And that's the goal of the draft is to add a couple pieces to your team that can lead you to the championship.